Hi everyone, welcome back to Government 2305. This is the second part of the Executive Branch lecture. So let's get started. So first we're going to start off by discussing the amendments that relate to the Executive Branch. There are 4 amendments, and we'll go over each one individually. And these are the amendments that pertain to the President, the Vice President, terms, succession, and so forth. So the first amendment is the 12th Amendment. The 12th Amendment discussed how a president would be elected. At this point in time, the state legislatures would meet and vote for a president, then vote for a vice president. During the time of the 12th Amendment, the president and vice president did not necessarily have to be from the same party or agree on the same things. They were voted for separately. If they so chose, one of the votes for president or vice president could be for a person from their own state. So the state legislatures could choose someone from within their own ranks. However, both of the president and the vice president could not be from the same state. They would then, the state legislators that we're speaking of, would then make a list of candidates and the number of votes they received and send it to the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate, in the presence of all members of the Senate and the House of Representatives, would then open all the lists and the votes would be counted. If one person had received a majority of votes for president, he would then be president. If there was no majority, the House of Representatives would then take the 3 highest vote getters and vote on the president from those 3 people. The important thing here was they had to vote as a state, and each state received 1 vote. If for some reason the House of Representatives could not select a president, then the vice president would act as president. In the case of no majority for the vice president, the Senate would then vote on the vice president from the 2 highest vote getters. What I just got from all that was that it was a very complicated process. It dealt with all of the state legislators and legislatures. The entire state had to vote as 1 unit, and that 1 unit received 1 vote for president. Both president and vice president could not come from the same state. So we're looking at a very complicated process, more so than what we have today. Now, the 20th Amendment. The 20th Amendment deals with the beginning and ending of terms for new executives. This is the president and vice president. So the presidential term ends at noon on January 20th, and the congressional terms end at noon on the 3rd day of January. So Congress is seated 17 days before the new president comes into office. Now, if an executive dies before the new term begins, but after the election, the vice president would take over for the president-elect. These are all very complicated and very specific issues, right? So basically, by having Congress in office before the president takes office, we are setting up government to always have somebody in office on the off chance that something happens to the president-elect before taking office. Now, the 22nd Amendment. This amendment sets the term limits for the president. This, of course, came about because of the number of terms that Franklin D. Roosevelt was able to win. Now, a person now, as of today, as of the 22nd Amendment, a person may only serve as president for 10 years or 2 terms. Now, if an acting vice president takes over for the president and has more than 2 years left on the term, the vice president may only serve 1 term of office. So basically the way this works is a president and vice president team, right? We have a team come into office in January. They are in office together for 1 year. The president passes away or can no longer serve. So that means we have 3 years left on this initial term. In this case, this is where the 22nd Amendment comes in. The vice president would take over and could only serve 1 more full term for a total of 7 years because he had more than 2 years left in that first term. So this is where the 22nd Amendment comes in. A person may only be president for 10 years or 2 terms, but if an acting vice president takes over for the president and has more than 2 years left on the term, the vice president may only serve 1 term as president. And lastly, the 25th Amendment. The 25th Amendment deals with the line of succession for president. If the president passes or is removed from office or something drastic happens to him, such as death, right? Then the vice president shall become president. Then the new president, the former vice president, must nominate a vice presidential candidate who must be confirmed by a majority vote of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. So the 25th Amendment deals with the line of succession for the presidency. And we will go over more regarding the line of succession on the next slide. Now, the current line of succession is quite long. It was at one point in time put into place and used. If you go back to President Nixon, his original vice president was Spiro Agnew. Agnew was investigated for criminal wrongdoing while he was holding various political offices. He was officially charged with numerous crimes, but eventually was charged with 1 on the condition that he resign as vice president. Now, Nixon then replaced Agnew by appointing the House Minority Leader Gerald Ford. However, as we now know, Nixon ended up resigning. So, here is the start of the presidential succession. And this is as of the Succession Act of 1947. Once Nixon resigned, Ford was appointed president while Nelson Rockefeller was appointed vice president. Hence, we had the president and vice president who had both been appointed and not elected. If we had not had the Presidential Succession Act in place, we would have had Nixon as president with Agnew as vice president. Once Agnew resigned, we would have had Nixon as president with the vice presidency vacant. Then, once Nixon resigned, we could have had Carl Albert, the Speaker of the House, appointed as president. So what we see is that the Presidential Succession Act starts off once the vice president has taken office, or if the president and vice president can no longer hold office. So if something happens to the president, the vice president takes over. If the vice president, for whatever reason, is unable to fulfill the presidential duties, the Speaker of the House of Representatives is the next person in line. And from there on, the line gets very long. Next is the President pro tempore of the Senate, then the Secretary of State, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, the Secretary of the Interior, Secretary of Agriculture, the Secretary of Commerce, Homeland Security, Labor, Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development, Transportation, Energy, Education. So you can see this is how the succession line goes after President and Vice President. If something happens to both of them, this is what the next line to the presidency looks like. And of course, the Secretary of Veteran Affairs is the last person on this list. Next, we're going to talk about some institutional resources, and basically these are presidential powers, and there are quite a few of them. Not a whole lot, but it's just a little bit of detailed information on what some of these resources are. Now, the president has thousands of officials and staffers who work for them, assist and or advise them. Together, these individuals make up the institutional presidency, thus giving the president a capacity for action. So these are the people who serve as advisors and leaders to the president. These are the people that would help him make decisions, keep him informed, and let them know what is going on throughout the executive branch. Remember, the executive branch is quite large and encompasses a lot of people. Now, first and foremost, we have the cabinet. Now, the cabinet is often distant from the president. The cabinet is comprised of the head of the different posts, and those are the people that are called secretaries. If you go back to the previous slide and look at the list of those persons that are in line for succession to the presidency, anybody who has the word secretary in front of their department is a part of the cabinet. The cabinet secretaries are appointed by the president with the consent of the Senate. So this is when you see cabinet appointees go before the Senate and be judged as whether they are worthy and will be confirmed as secretary to that department. They go before a Senate hearing in order to have the consent and approval of the Senate. Now, these are the people that once the president nominates them and they are appointed to their post are the most removed because they lead very large agencies and departments. The president will call on them for advice from time to time, but it is the secretary's responsibilities to run these huge departments. Next is the White House staff. Now, the White House staff is often called the eyes and ears of the president. These people are analysts and advisors to the president. They are often given the title of special assistants. Now, the White House staff, within this staff, there is usually a small group of people that will develop, and this is considered the kitchen cabinet. Now, when you stop and consider what a kitchen cabinet is, when you meet up with your family and friends, or if you need to discuss something with your family, you usually sit around a kitchen table. It's a small group of people. It's the people you trust the most, that are the most important to you, that you know you can depend on their advice. It's the same general idea for the president. The kitchen cabinet that develops from within the White House staff is an informal group of advisors to whom the president turns to for counsel and guidance. Presidents have preferred the White House staff over the cabinet as a means of managing the executive branch, for that very reason that the White House staff is probably the most loyal to the president and is always going to tell the president not necessarily what he wants to hear, but what is best for him to hear, right? What should make the most sense. I mean, they are his counsel and guidance for a reason. Now, the Executive Office of the President, or EOP, now this is the visible sign of a modern, strong presidency. It was established in 1939, and their responsibility is the permanent agencies that perform management tasks for the president. So some examples of these agencies include the Office of Management and Budget, the Council of Economic Advisors, and the National Security Council. Between 1,500 and 2,000 specialized individuals work for these agencies. The Office of Management and Budget, the OMB. Now, their role is to prepare the national budget, design the president's programs, report on agency activities, and oversee regulatory proposals. As another example, the Council on Economic Advisors analyzes the economy and economic trends to give the president the ability to anticipate events rather than waiting and reacting as events happen. And of course, the National Security Council gives the president advice on national security, on threats and perceived threats. So it is these agencies such as these that make up the Executive Office of the President. These are people that will always report to the president and give him updates on a fairly daily or regular basis. Now, the vice presidents used to have two jobs. It used to be that the vice president was basically around to sit and wait to see if he would be needed to succeed the president. The other was to cast the tie-breaking votes in the Senate when it became necessary. Now, neither was hardly a very stressful job, right? You're getting paid to sit around and wait and see if your services are needed. You don't really have any input. You don't have any specified responsibilities. You are there on the off chance that something happens to the president, or that the Senate has a tie when it comes to voting on legislation. However, the vice president has now become more important to the president simply on the fact that the vice president has electoral value for the president. Now, what does this mean? This means that in recent elections and nominations, presidents have chosen their running mates, their vice presidential candidates, from states that they do not hold strong ties to. If the president is from the north, then they will pick somebody from the West Coast states, or vice versa, so that the vice president can carry those states for them when it comes time for voting. It is now for the presidential candidate, they have to be able to have the support of these states, and there are certain states that will vote strictly Republican or strictly Democratic or have majorities of either party. And depending on the presidential candidate, they will then have to rely on the vice president to carry those states that the president does not have a clear-cut lead going into their election. So the vice president has to be able to bring in the support of at least their own state. Now, over the last 25 years, presidents have also used their vice presidents as management resources after the election. So vice presidents are now being given specific tasks to try to complete or to manage. When President Obama's, during President Obama's last administration, his then Vice President Joe Biden was tasked with trying to forward and advance a cure for cancer. Each vice president would then have now going in some type of task that they are responsible for. During President Trump's administration, Vice President Mike Pence was tasked with leading the COVID-19 task force, and it was his responsibility to get persons gathered together and the pharmaceutical companies pushed into trying to develop vaccines and carry out research at fast pace so that we could get vaccinations to the FDA in record time. So what we see is the vice president has become more important because they are now tasked with very specific issues that they are then the lead for. Now, lastly, as an institutional resource, what we have is the first spouse. It used to be the first lady, right? Since we have not had a woman president yet, we do not have the first spouse or first man yet. But it used to be that the first lady would participate in presidential ceremonial activities. They would greet foreign dignitaries, visit other countries, attend important ceremonies. However, in recent years, first ladies have begun to exert more influence over presidential administrations and policies and have taken up interests that are important to them. Recent first ladies have shown interest in a variety of different issues, and each of the last 4 to 5 first ladies have been very prolific in having their issues put forth and going around the country trying to gain support for what is important to them. Michelle Obama tackled childhood obesity and getting fresh and non-processed foods into schools to make it healthier for children to eat their lunches and breakfasts. Laura Bush and her mother-in-law, Barbara Bush, each had reading as their issue of choice. Before them, we have Hillary Clinton when she was First Lady. Hers was universal health care, and it was a very hot topic or hot button issue at the time. The Congress did not feel that it was in her place or in her right to bring up universal health care and try to get policy established. So she took a big beating for trying to get universal health care. Yet here we are a few administrations later, and we now have universal health care available. Even Melania Trump tried to have an issue that she could champion. Although it was more difficult to actually understand what she was trying to accomplish with her Be Best campaign, it seemed to be very broad and did not focus on one specific thing. But every First Lady since Barbara Bush we have seen take on a more active role. And even before her, Nancy Reagan took up the Don't Do Drugs campaign. So for her, it basically started with Nancy Reagan, I would say. Check on Canvas because I will give you additional notes on institutional resources, but specifically on the president, the vice president, and the first spouse. So please be sure you check your class Canvas module so that you can read up on the additional information. Now, what makes a president stronger? At one time, there was a debate about whether presidents were weak or strong. Today, every president is considered strong. This is a reflection of the increasing power of the office, not necessarily of the person, but of the office. Presidents seek to dominate the policy-making process and to lead the nation, of course, in times of war and of disasters. This expansion of presidential power is the result of an ongoing effort by presidents to enlarge the powers of the office. Some have succeeded, whereas others have failed. Generally, though, presidents can expand their power in three ways: by using their party, by popular mobilization, and of course by administration. So, first and foremost, let's tackle party. Political party is a source of power. In regards to party, presidents construct or strengthen national partisan institutions to exert influence in the legislative process and to implement their programs. So presidents will use their party to help get legislation passed. I mean, that is the whole point. If you have a president and a Congress that are of the same party. Although the party is valuable to the president, it has not always been fully reliable due to its autonomy. This is why we have separate legislative and separate executive branches. So, because it is not always a reliable source, right? Party is not always a reliable source. The presidents, of course, have the other two methods which they can then tap into. Now, going public. This is where presidents will go public and try to whip up the people, whip up support for their policies. And this is not anything new. We have seen this all along the nation of the history of our nation. Before the invention of social media, we had television. Before television, we had radio. And before radio, we had newspapers. Presidents have been using all of these mediums in order to get their concerns, their voice, their policies, this was their way of reaching the people and getting their support. Now, social media has become the newest medium for presidents and administrations to use in order to get their policies and concerns out and to get the support of the people. So presidents use, of course, these appeals to create a mass base of support that will allow them to subordinate their political foes, right? To put the other party down or those who do not support them. So since FDR, since Franklin Roosevelt, presidents have sought to craft a public relations strategy, emphasizing the incumbent strengths and maximizing their popular appeal. But there is an issue with going public, and that is that popular support is not a firm foundation of presidential power. Why is this? Well, this is because we, the people, are fickle. Even though presidents generate popular support with programs and policy promises for the well-being of Americans, inevitably presidential performance falls short of promises and expectations, which then leads to a sharp decline in public support and ensures that presidential influence collapses. This, of course, explains the decrease in the use of going public. Specifically, primetime television, presidential appearances, and the use of institutional public and media relations. Now, when presidents come into office, after being elected, being sworn in, there is this uptick in support. They're still running on this election high. Everybody is glad to have new blood in the office, right? New people, new administration, new policies will be brought forth. But what happens 100, 200 days into the administration? Well, promises aren't being kept, policies can't be passed, you see issues come up between the president and Congress, and people start getting angry. Well, the thing that we, the people, have to understand and remember is that we're in this for the long haul. This is 4 years that we have of this administration, whatever the new administration is. And presidents, people running for president, will promise you what you want to hear in order to get elected. And presidents will tell you that, yes, we can get this done. However, we have to realize that this is not always the case. Just because they promise they can get it done does not mean it will happen. Remember, we have to be able to work together, the presidency, the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and concessions have to be made in order to get policies voted and passed. So we have to understand this is a long haul game. Not all promises will be kept, but people get upset, right? Because promises were made and they weren't kept. So we have to decide if we are willing to take the good with the bad and understand that this is just the way things work. It doesn't mean that it's right or it's wrong, it's just the way that it is. And we have to realize that going public is one way for the president to garner support. Every president does it, and it's a matter of how much can they get done of what they promised to do. Now, the last thing that makes the president stronger is the administrative state. And contemporary presidents have increased the administrative capabilities of their office in 4 ways. First, they enhance the reach and power of the executive office of the president. Secondly, they increased White House control and regulatory review over the federal bureaucracy. Third, they expanded the role of the executive orders and other instruments of direct unilateral presidential governance. And 4, they have used signing statements to negate congressional actions to which they object. Now, these 4 components are called the White House administrative strategy. And this is what gives presidents the capacity to achieve their programs and policies, even when Congress disapproves. So we have Executive Office of the President, right? Regulatory review, governing by decree, such as the executive orders, and signing statements. This is how presidents stay strong. And this is what presidents will use to keep their office strong. So I have set up some more notes on the Executive Office of the President, the regulatory review, and the governing by decree and signing statements. So be sure you check Canvas for more information on that. And let me know if you have any questions on the executive branch or the presidency specifically, or any part of this lecture or part 1. And I will be back next time with our next topic. So I look forward to presenting the next order of business for 2305. Until then, thanks.